Happy Juneteenth, everybody. Welcome to a very special essay. Seeing the last, the black essay, is not needed to parse this one, but it does stand as a jumping off point of sorts for this one, as the things we discuss in that essay are still very relevant to us today, particularly the ubiquity of black and hip-hop culture and pop culture, and whether or not it's been gentrified for white society or has been elevated as a cultural touchstone that cannot belong to anyone. I don't think either take is wrong, but how strongly I feel about which one I feel is more relevant to discuss changes as often as the wind. This is pretty relevant today because in a few hours we'll be doing a subathon, and as this is Juneteenth, Infantabyte will be playing 2 games that have black protagonists. However, as of this writing, a few days ago, it came to our attention that the devs for both of these games are not black. And that came as a shock and kind of spiraled me into a stark depression for a few days. On Twitter, an account made us aware that those developers were not black and also linked us to a spreadsheet full of black developed games. Problem solved, right? They encouraged us to play one of these instead. We had access to about 2 of them, but neither of them seemed like a good fit for the stream. Also, we kind of playtested the games in question to make sure that they were something that we could run and spend time on. Not to mention, we had to get Infantabyte to agree on what games she wanted to play, because as a system, we try to allow everyone in our system to have individual choices as much as possible. And none of the games really stuck out to her. It's very distressing because after pursuing the games presented, even beyond Fanta, none of them really sparked that sense of, yes, I want to play this game all in one sitting. 8, 10, 12 hours of it. This was really scary, however, because it harkened back to insecurities that we've been struggling with all our life. Insecurities that have been fostered by being told by people of color and white people alike that we're not black enough. And since becoming a content creator, we've gotten criticism in our personal life about not elevating black artists enough. And so, we self-flagellate about how much we contribute to black media discourse and promote other black artists. This is exacerbated by the fact that I don't have any black content creator friends that I could really ask for a take on the situation. For as long as we've been streaming as a career, we've not had many black folks in our circles. And the few that aren't really doing what we do. So we couldn't really ask any black creators unless we reached out to distant acquaintances or strangers. And that felt quite intimidating, considering I have plenty of marginalized friends, however, not a lot of black ones. Considering I have a lot of marginalized friends, however, I resolved to ask them, and just ask them what they would do in the same situation if, instead of black creators, it was queer or disabled or plural ones. And I got answers I respected and was satisfied with, luckily, which led to us deciding not to change our choices. Although this essay partially exists as a measure to explain ourselves. It was still sad that I didn't have a social circle that could facilitate the type of support I was looking for, but I was still very fortunate to have the support that I got. If the friends that helped me out are watching, thank you so much. You help more than you can know. We've been on the outside of a lot of black culture throughout our life. Part of it is the strong lack of presence of black culture in the parts of media culture we take great interest in, that being anime and video game culture. There's black presence there, but it is very, very small. If we don't actively look for black artists, it's easy for their work to get buried under an avalanche of other voices. And when I see black culture, especially hip-hop culture, infused with other things that I like, I'm honestly very smitten. But the truth is, these projects seem seldom to have any black hands on the wheel. In the last black essay, we mentioned Bomb Rush Cyberfunk and Lethal League Blaze, which themselves are spiritual successors to Jet Set Radio, and set to come out perhaps sometime this year? It's something that I love, and I don't bear any ill will towards those who are making games that don't have black voices in them, even if that inspiration is definitely rooted in black culture. Especially because of our argument of the cultural exchange that happens with black culture and Japanese culture, resulting in Japanese street culture and black otaku culture. The former being a major influence in many games and anime, including a game that I'm really excited for, Zenless Zone Zero. Although ZZZ is developed by Hollowverse, a Chinese developer, the inspiration is undeniable, and my enthusiasm for the game actually got me back into Genshin Impact. Hilarious. Conversations about what counts as anime are still very prevalent in anime-centered communities. Many still assert that if it's not from Japan, it's not anime, regardless of the inspirations or intent behind it, which to me reflects the argument I am trying to make here about hip-hop art and stuff that pulls from black culture, and who should or shouldn't be making it. Of course, like Punk mentions in her old essay about Starfetchers, the street culture hip-hop vibe does not only belong to Japan. Hell, the dev for that game is Swedish. When I talk about the ubiquity of hip-hop culture, that's what I mean. And hell, with the internet and how easy it is for anyone to come into contact with this world of b-boys, lyrical mayhem, and graffiti, it no longer has a clean line of what inspired you, especially as more independent artists than ever try their hand at making an impact. If someone likes the aesthetic of Jet Set Radio but has never listened to any hip-hop outside of what's in that game, and they decide to make a game inspired off of just Jet Set Radio, they're not necessarily privy to the long history that led up to something like Jet Set Radio existing. But that doesn't mean they're not allowed to make something that is inspired through it. It's also the reason why the term anime is debated so vehemently. There are plenty of American or Canadian animation works that for some, myself included, count as anime, as they were very undoubtedly inspired by such. I think something like Oban Star Racers or Totally Spies can be included as anime, even if you want to argue that it deserves a term similar to genre labels like Souls-like and Roguelike, anime-like. Although the conversation gets convoluted when you realize a lot of animation work gets done overseas and cannot be solely defined by the geographics of the studio making it, which when you do some digging would make certain episodes of Western animation anime, or certain episodes of things generally regarded as anime not anime. In the same way that some alcohols can be referred to only by specific names, like Scotch, if they were only made in the specific place that it's supposed to come from. And it gets really obnoxious really quickly when something is considered to be a thing in all but name, when it's definitely that thing in function. Which is why we will always maintain that hip-hop cannot be made only by black people. I mean, I don't think that part's even a controversial statement. However, I think I would be remiss to not mention how much black people have and continue to be exploited by and for our art, whilst being consistently dehumanized and mistreated. And as a result, not only do most black game devs have a hard time at large making shit just from the probability of being poor and or disenfranchised, but also how the vast majority of hip-hop inspired art, or hell, just art with black protagonists that are profitable, tend to profit only white people. That was a big component of the last black essay as well. Before the ease at which anyone could on paper make an indie game without having gone to school for it, many black games were made or at least funded by black folks, who got money through other means. The Wu-Tang Clan's Beat 'em Up game and the graffiti game Mark Echo's Getting Up, made by a clothing line with a large black target audience, immediately come to mind. However, hip-hop and rap are not the only kinds of black culture, and I think it's very relevant to admit that as someone who appreciates hip-hop more in adulthood than when I grew up with it, when I felt like it was being shoved down my throat like an instant loss meme. I didn't outright reject my culture growing up, but I did have resentment for it, as up to a certain point, a lot of my trauma was laced with its aesthetics, or had it as a background soundtrack. Hip-hop was the music my brother and cousin liked, and it played in the background of them chastising me for not being masculine enough, or of their downright physical abuse. R&B was all that played in the car trips we took with our mothers, who groaned when we wanted to put on Radio Disney for even a moment, and limited us to 1 or 2 songs. And of course, R&B was a soundtrack to many a fight between them. Basketball was what many expected us to get into because of our height, and was even how a classmate and a major bully of ours escaped poverty, now a famous NBA star, who was celebrated in our community, so much so that any talk about how they treated people like us was drowned out by the amazing things that they were doing. It was hard for us to find comfort in black art when so many of the abusive forces we were around loved it. Association does not mean that these things are bad, but I had to put a lot of effort into healing to approach almost any of it. And so seeing a lot of hip-hop culture through an alternative lens was very useful to me. And the things that I did find comfort in, anime and the like, were things our family and bullies cited as the reason for our alienation. If you like Lil Wayne, you could be normal. Why do you like anime so much? Do you hate being black? Do you want to dye your hair because you're ashamed? Or is it because you want to be Asian? Suffice to say, it was a lot to deal with. So, as an adult, and being away from those abusive forces, we had a lot better time learning about our culture and the contributions black folks have made to society and especially art. And now we're even more torn, because a lot of the stuff we flock to has the trappings of black culture, but is very often not influenced by black artists at all. At least not directly. One thing about Dandara in particular, a story about a chosen one awakening from a celestial cradle to liberate a people who've had their inspiration to even make art taken from them through oppression, breeding hopelessness in them, with touches of black Afrocentric art that seems to be reflected in the composition of the NPCs, and the Afrofuturism of the main character and world, my Scion Thorn was completely convinced that the devs were black. Admittedly, they are mostly of color, but they probably just did their homework. Our decision to not change the lineup is reinforced by the fact that as a black person, the game that spoke to us the most this year about our struggles was made by 2 white Canadians. Though it's not lost on me how weird that is. Cool Kid Cody, maybe even just by accident, doesn't just touch on the obvious queer themes that are apparent through metaphor in its story and world building, but also has an equally transient read of being caught between cultures and alienated, similar to the struggle of being biracial, which ironically, though we are not, growing up it was hard to determine if we were, as our lineage was obfuscated from us, enhancing our imposter syndrome when we didn't fit in or get along with other black kids. And so it's a struggle I identify with very strongly. Not knowing who my biological father was, coupled with both my mother's hatred for white people and our way of speaking that garnered bullying from peers from talking too white, made me assume that there was a possibility that I was half white. Much like the struggles presented in Cool Kid Cody of being assumed that because you are born a cool kid or a loser, that your interests and posturing would have to align with the camp you are assumed to have to belong to, or else you're a failure to your community. Let alone the ways you're expected to act. It speaks to me profoundly. The inclusion of a black protagonist was not necessary for these themes to get across. However, with one, it means a whole lot more to me. Moreover, I relived actual trauma playing that game, as Cody's abusive grandmother was a spitting image of one of our moms. Not just in her appearance, but also her beliefs, and the way she emotionally abuses Cody. It was very emotionally taxing to play. So it's hard to say that for me that I inherently find more value in works about black people when they are written by us. If I didn't know already about the devs who made it, I could have easily assumed the race of the creators, just like I did with Dandara and Fostering Apocalypse. It resonated that damn much. And knowing that, it's really hard to write off Dandara and Fostering Apocalypse as bad games to play for black rep, especially with the themes that they represent, not just who made them. This isn't too surprising, however, because cis and het artists often make art that I tend to enjoy for very not cishet reasons. sometimes with very queer-coded or outright queer characters. So it's not like I think that only people of a certain walk of life can only make art that speaks to that walk of life. Evangelion's breakdown of gender and the love many trans people have for Shinji is one of the best examples of that. For some people, Shinji is a trans icon. However, Black and BIPOC artists are generally undervalued and underappreciated, if not downright directed vitriol at for speaking up against racism and injustice. So it's still important to platform Black artists. Hey, this is Drizzle in the editing booth, and I realize right here someone could take what I'm saying as Black art should only be platformed or only has inherent value as long as there is racism and a reason that like we should be protected or helped because, you know, society is against us. Art of any community culturally is important and is worth being seen just as much as anyone else's art, and so it should be platformed and be given room to grow and be seen for those reasons as well. Duh. This summer's resurfacing of anti-Black sentiment in the VTuber community comes starkly to mind for me, especially as our sonas are Black coded, but as furries, we subtly sidestep some of the racism that we would get if our models were Black and human. For the record, the racist sentiment in the VTuber community never went away. It's just much stronger in the last few months, we've noticed. When Black VTubers call out the racism in the community, we too often get bombarded with hate and assertions that we are causing drama, clout fishing, or crying wolf. The crossover of the video game and anime community, two communities of which are very important to me, being so largely willing to gaslight, harass, or generally bully marginalized folks is a huge disappointment. But not at all a surprise. But Justice's treatment is not the end of it. I have had the displeasure of seeing Black VTubers cite that some model makers are not willing to work with them if they want a Black model made. That some dark-skinned VTubers find it just easier to not have a Black model to avoid harassment. Or seeing non-Black VTubers who get called out for having Black models doubling down on calling Black VTubers exclusionists for having a problem with it. Some of which had led their audiences to believe that they were Black before they were called out, as opposed to more innocent reasons for having a Black model as a white VTuber. And I don't even have the energy to get into the VTuber fans who get excited when non-Black VTubers say or almost say the N-word, even if they profusely apologize.
Joe Biden, Polish ride him, he slips up and down like an old violin. Fuck him, he's got a lot of nigger. Oh! That sounded bad. That sounded really bad, but it is not what I just said. That is not, it sounded bad, but I did not.
For clarification, recently, I tried to do a freestyle rap on stream and accidentally said a really hateful slur, the N-word, because I was mixing words together and tried to incorporate a viewer's name into the rap. The slur is not part of my vocabulary. I apologize and deleted the VOD and clips so as not to hurt anyone. Someone clipped it anyways and spread it around out of malice, and I'm really sorry to anyone or any communities affected. I know that even accidents can hurt people, and it's never my intention to hurt anyone. It was an honest mistake. I apologize on Twitch, but wanted more people to see this and get context. Please do not follow me for saying the word either. It was a mistake and will not happen again, and I don't condone these actions. So yeah, we were originally not going to give this whole thing that much time in the video, but when we were editing, it just felt wrong to not acknowledge it just a little bit more, especially after we did a little bit more digging. And I think that the whole like culture war thing that always happens with things like this is always so obnoxious. Some of the tweets that we didn't display mentioned some of the stuff that we do technically agree with, that it was an accident, a slip of the tongue, that sort of thing. However, a lot of people, and generally all the people that were doing that, regardless of their race, were kind of implying that because it was a mistake, that an apology was not necessary, and anyone who was offended is either pretending to be offended, or doesn't have thick enough skin, or just wants to cause drama. And it's the thing that we're talking about in this video. It's literally the thing that we're talking about in this video. And it's really frustrating, in fact, because someone even had noticed that there were quote tweets going out where black people were noticing the video and were like, huh, that's funny, and using that as a reason that no one should be offended because a handful of black people said it was okay. And regardless of whatever marginalized group of people are being disrespected, even if there is a subsection of us that are like, oh wow, that is funny. And let me be clear, we did laugh. However, that doesn't make it not hurtful. And that doesn't mean that an apology wasn't necessary and right to do. Not to give too much praise to a non-black person for this, but a lot of people in the same position, we feel, at least from how we've been seeing the VTuber community, would have doubled down on having done nothing wrong because it was a slip of the tongue. And recognizing that you can hurt people even by accident is a major step towards things being okay. And things are far from okay, even if you're just talking about the VTuber community and racism and ableism and stuff. We could make a whole video on that, but we're not today because it's Juneteenth and we want to be at least a little bit more positive. But yeah, it's important to recognize the full context of things when you can, but that also doesn't mean that you have to forgive them either. And I think that that's important. And your forgiveness or you being okay with it does not mean it's okay for others. And we hate the straw man argument that because allies will stand up for us, that they aren't right to do so and that they're just virtue signaling. Hell, the response that's right next to my head right now is very apt. Mari, I was really disappointed seeing that clip, and honestly, it's not my place to forgive you. However, I was even more disappointed after seeing how you seem to treat it like a joke. It came off as really insensitive. Most VTubers are first and foremost entertainers, and being live is a whole different experience than what I'm doing right now, where I'm gonna be able to cut around this and cut through my stammer so you don't hear me struggling to form words since we didn't script this. And I think that it did come off as insensitive because it was a oh shit moment. And I think that disregarding the comedic effect of it would be disingenuous of me, but I do think that a lot of VTubers, when put in a hot seat situation on a hot button issue and having messed up on something, would probably not immediately go to Stoneface, okay, this is a hashtag serious episode stream now. Not everyone's us. That being said, back to the video. Showing their whole ass in that they are excited to see cute VTubers say racist shit. Black rep is very necessary, and we will continue to look for black game devs whose games speak to us, but we do struggle with promoting artists of any kind just because they share community with us. It's a hard tightrope to balance. That game list I mentioned before of black game devs will be in the description of this video, but I also want to say I can't wait for black-led game projects that I've been waiting for patiently. Like She Dreams Elsewhere, Proto-Droid Delta, Advent Neon, and Breeze in the Clouds, to name a few. And I have to admit, even with resources like Black Voices in Gaming, an organization that has a website you can go to that promotes black video games and has a black game dev showcase, which for this year didn't even happen too long ago, I still feel a little wilted because I feel like it's still an uphill battle for me to not just find black made games that I resonate with, but also making sure that those games represent what I think they do. Illustrated by Psychonauts 2 inclusion on the list of promoted games for Black Voices in Gaming. I want to be clear, black creatives did work on it, but it is Tim Schafer's brainchild, and so it is not black-led. Not to say that it shouldn't have been included, but it was hard to find any of that information out through Black Voices in Gaming, and so I had to do my own research, even relying on one of my white friends that just happens to be a big Psychonauts fan. And that's also the challenge that we keep seeming to face. And with limited spoons and a lot on our plate, it's been very challenging to make sure and fact check just which games we platform when we say that they are made by certain types of people. Which is why finding out about the games that we're playing today were not made by black game devs was so disheartening, and even to a degree earth-shattering. When we're not talking about indie developers, the creative forces behind it can be even more obfuscated. Because of the size of certain game studios, I think classifying them as AAA wouldn't necessarily be correct, but classifying them as strictly indie would also be misleading. Psychonauts 2 is arguably not an indie, or at least not in the same way something like Don't Give Up a Cynical Tale is, or She Dreams Elsewhere. When you have a small team, it's much easier to know who the devs are, and to satisfy the desire to confirm that it's a project made by marginalized people. Like when we looked up Fostering Apocalypse to confirm that the dev wasn't black, but we did find out that they are non-binary and autistic. Which for the record, I don't see as a consolation necessarily, but it was valuable information. And definitely made us want to play it more. Fighting for representation, for rights, for respect, for acknowledgement, and support is in no way easy, and it will continue to get more complex and nuanced as we continue to see more visibility of marginalized people in art, especially as big companies, like Activision, try to appeal to diversity without actually hiring more diverse staff, essentially trying to speedrun representation in games media in an attempt to get all the accolades with none of the effort. It's gonna be hard as people continue to tell us on all sides that wanting better rep and more visibility is selfish or arrogant. That wanting equal rights and not being victims of racism is bad somehow? We have to keep fighting. And if you fight for that too, you have our respect. Your life will be filled with happiness and sadness. But for today, I hope it's more of the former. See you on stream, everybody. Hi everybody, it's me, Infantabyte. If you're watching this the day it comes out, then we'll probably be streaming by the time you finish this video. If that's the case, you can head on over to twitch.tv/Fluffbyte and enjoy Juneteenth with us as I play some games with black protagonists not made by black people. Might shove in a few demos too, since Steam Nuts Fest is still going. Oh, right. Patreon credits. We'd like to thank our beautiful, beautiful patrons. R2 Walker, Nova System, Void Walker System, and Valued Customer. If you'd like to support us, get your names in videos, and eventually get extra perks since we haven't been doing so many posts on Patreon lately, then you can head over there, and we definitely appreciate it. You get a nifty Discord role. We didn't talk about Juneteenth itself in this video. It's now recognized as a national holiday, and to give you just the short version, after the Civil War was over and the Emancipation Proclamation was put into effect, not all slave owners, specifically in the South, actually freed their slaves, because as far as the slaves knew, they were still enslaved. So around this time of the year, a few years after slavery was over, there were folks that were federally mandated to, or tasked with, we should totally read the Wikipedia on stream, but there were people who were riding through all the southern states to tell all the slaves that they had been freed. And so, although it is kind of a bitter moment that there was a bunch of slave masters that didn't tell their newly freed slaves that they were free, and they were basically working unjustly legally, that is, at that point, it is seen as a celebration. And we are happy that we can talk about it freely, and it's not weird, and that visibility for it is so much higher now. It's actually really, really amazing. And it's part of Black culture that we sometimes would forget about, because when you're not around that many Black people, sometimes it feels weird to bring stuff like that up. But with the community we've built and the types of people we connect with, both in streaming and outside of it, we've really been able to experience radical acceptance, at least within our own spaces. We hope that others can feel that love and acceptance too. If you come on to the stream, either today or Saturday or Sunday or Monday, we hope you have a good time. And no matter what happens, we believe in you. So take care of yourself, okay?